Welcome to the Center Collaborative, Creative Solutions in Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice, brought to you by the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, which is also known as the Center. We at the Center are all about solutions. Our job in Oregon is to facilitate improvement of the system so behavioral health and criminal justice can work better together to engage people in treatment while promoting public safety. I am your host, Chris Thomas. I hold a master's degree in clinical psychology and have focused on the intersection between behavioral health and criminal justice for 20 years. Over 7 of those years were behind the walls of a maximum security prison. During this podcast, you will have the opportunity to sit in on real, in-depth conversations with experts about complex topics in a way that is both fascinating and digestible. We will focus not just on what is wrong with the system, but what is going right and how we can work together to evolve. In this episode, I have the opportunity to sit down with Ross Acker, Advanced Health CCO Director of Coordinated Care and a licensed professional counselor, Megan Rydell, COO's Health and Wellness Brief Treatment Crisis Service Manager and a licensed professional counselor, and Kelly Andrews, retired Coos County Sheriff Office Captain, to talk about the importance of relationships and the evolution of a crisis intervention team program and mobile crisis in Coos County. We have a frank conversation about how difficult it was to start the relationship in the beginning and its evolution over time, but how those relationships have allowed Coos County to have a robust CIT program, a 24/7 mobile crisis program, and now they're looking at starting a sobering center. We also take time to talk about cases that highlight the importance of behavioral health and law enforcement working together. Ross, Megan, and Kelly have an incredible relationship. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with them. I think you will too. Welcome to our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, hello.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We're here today to talk about how you all came together to start a crisis intervention team training program in Coos County. Ross, I've known you for quite a few years. Golly, I think we're going on 4 or 5 years at this point. We met when I was working over at the Health Authority and started chatting about fitness to proceed and jail diversion and jail deflection. And I think at that point, you were just starting to work on starting a crisis intervention team. Am I recalling that correctly?
Megan and I got hired around the same time at what used to be Coos County Mental Health back in the day, like 10 years ago now. And we were on the crisis team together. Back then, it was kind of like, well, law enforcement's over there, we're over here, we're doing our thing, they're doing their thing. It's always been this way. As in, it's working, I guess, just fine. Although we knew it really wasn't. But it was early. We didn't really know how or what it would look like. We had instincts that it probably should be different, but we didn't really know how that was going to be. Megan and I, pretty early on, were starting to reach out. I mean, I didn't know what I was really doing in terms of how I was going to work with law enforcement. Honestly, that's kind of where it started. I don't know what you think, Megan.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the other thing I think that Ross and I both were kind of, well, nobody said yes to them in a while. Why don't we start saying yes when they call us and want some help? Let's see where that takes us. And that, I think, was a real pivotal point for us in making some changes and starting to build those relationships, because we had stopped saying yes a long time ago to helping them out for whatever reason it was. That was the history, like Ross is alluding to. And it wasn't until that change happened that things started moving in a different direction.
Right, I agree. And we did start saying yes. And there were individual situations, clients that we shared, we would get a call and we would ask, can we go out? Can we meet APD? I remember APD, there were situations with APD where they had a case manager. Can you come out? This person's mentally ill. No, y'all don't usually do this kind of thing. That's law enforcement. My memory's not perfect. I can't remember all the individual events, but it wasn't like they called and say, hey, can you come out? I don't remember it being like that. I think we were like looking for opportunities, like Megan was talking about. Like once we kind of collectively decided, yes, we want to help, we just didn't know how to help. As crazy as that sounds, that's how siloed we were. We like didn't know how to connect, how to collaborate. And I can't remember exactly how we got to you, Kelly, like exactly how it first started. Do you remember how we came to you or how that played out?
If I may, I'll give a little bit of a history of the way it's been in Coos County. I started in law enforcement there in 97. 98, I went to patrol. And the basic academy had maybe 4 hours on mental health and how to deal with people with mental illnesses. I mean, it was nothing. I mean, it was just a class you sat through at that time. We got out to the road and out to the street, and we would actually very rarely come across people in crisis like we see now anyway. Things were a lot different back then, but we would call and ask for help for mental health, and we were shut down every single time. We would say, hey, we'd like to refer this over. And it was just not a great environment. I progressed on, went into detectives, come back out to patrol in 2007. And one of the first things I noticed was we have a lot more people with mental illnesses out on the street, and we're dealing with them more and more. And we don't know how to do this. How do we work with these folks? We really struggled through 2007 through probably 2013. And during that time, I was fortunate to go from patrol and get a couple other assignments. I went in narcotics, and my team leader in narcotics was just getting ready to rotate out to patrol as a sergeant. One of the first things he did about 2 months into his rotation back out was, there's a lot more folks out here that we're dealing with mental illnesses that, we don't know anything about. 2014 comes around, and I remember I'd been brought back out in 2013 to be a patrol sergeant. We're still dealing with the same issues. But in 2014, I get this call from the captain, says, hey, we got a guy from mental health coming down, and he wants to go out and meet with this guy who apparently had been in crisis in Douglas County. And he was coming to a very small community inside Coos County. I meet Ross at the sheriff's office, and he hops in with me, and it's the first time I've ever met the guy. So we just started talking on the way out there, handled the call. Do you want to know about the call?
Tell them about the call. It was a good call.
Yeah, I'm
Tell them
curious
what Ross
about the call.
did and why it bothered you.
Yeah, it bothered me a lot. This call, when a cop goes out on these things, we're thinking a whole multitude of things. We're wanting to know what the issue is. How do we get the issue resolved? When you get there, it's also, you're constantly putting in all these alternate plans. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? And so Ross and I chat on the way out there, and we just chit chat basically. We go up on this driveway, and it's a long driveway. It climbs up to this dilapidated mobile home up on a hill. So Ross, he says he'll take the lead on it and he'll talk to him. So I just kind of stayed back at my patrol vehicle. And this guy comes out, and he's wearing no shirt. He's got a flannel, like an overshirt on, really thick and everything. Ross just goes up and starts talking with him. And this guy is just going off. He's just going off on Ross. And Ross is just this tiny guy. And I really was like, I don't know, what am I going to have to do with this guy if he takes out Ross? Because Ross is going to go down in a heartbeat if he gets hit. I mean, he's just going to hit the ground. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't see any weapons. I'm not sure I'm going to be able, I'm not going to use deadly force. Okay, I got a taser on me. I got pepper spray. Well, pepper spray is not going to really work because then I'll take out Ross and then he'll just get hurt. And, how am I going to protect this guy? This guy's just in Ross's face, and he's just screaming and yelling. And Ross is just talking to him, just really de-escalating him. But on the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, am I going to have to deploy a taser? That's not going to work, because the flannel shirt is just waving around. The darts are going to hit it. It's not going to hit the skin. We're not going to get an effect. So I'm going to have to shoot this guy. If he does something really bad, I'm going to have to use deadly force. What the heck is this guy getting me into? So Ross continues to talk, and the guy comes down and de-escalates and gets down, and they come to a resolution. And we get into the patrol vehicle and we get off the mountain there. I was amazed at how easy, not easy, but how well it worked. And I had previous crisis training. I went through FBI negotiator school for crisis intervention. So I knew the active listening steps and stuff, but we really hadn't applied that stuff to everyday work. That was my first encounter with Ross. And on the way back, we started formulating thoughts in our minds, both of us. We may have even voiced it a few times to each other about how can we go about fixing this? Because we've never been able to work well with mental health. It just didn't work. I saw an opportunity with Ross coming out that, wow, this is an opportunity for us to work together and work on this problem that was facing Coos County.
It was really cool to hear that version of the story because I remember that day, and I remember we were in your vehicle and we were both kind of teasing each other, like, well, what are you going to do? We didn't even, I think we knew both instinctively what we were going to do, but we weren't really sure what it was going to look like when it actually happened. There's some inherent faith, I think, that needs to be there. And it was there. And I remember thinking, wow, I think by the time we got pretty close to the property, I just had this sense you were there to protect, and I was there to talk and to kind of figure out what was going on with him psychologically, because that's what Megan and I do every day. We just do it all the time, and that's just natural. I had some trust in you that if anything bad went down, then you would take care of it. I'm not as feeble as maybe you implied there. I do have some defensive tactics in my background, so I'm not like completely useless. So I just wanted to say that it worked really well and that I understood after that, just that one event, how we each function in those crisis situations. Yeah, it went really well.
So it sounds like for Coos County, it was really that faith, that moment of faith with each other to go out on this call together when the relationship hadn't really been all that great to begin with between law enforcement and behavioral health. There definitely been some barriers in there. But then you had this opportunity to come in and work together on a call. It worked beautifully, although a little terrifying at points for Kelly if the things could go horribly wrong, but that it went beautifully and that you were able to talk in the car on the way back. And this started the seeds of the mobile crisis team, of, I'm assuming, crisis intervention training later on. How did you grow those seeds from that first initial leap of faith?
Well, the evolution of the crisis team, that's Megan. That's all Megan. I will say that my part in this was helping grow CIT. CIT was the precursor to Megan's great expansion of crisis team. So I, again, instinctively knew that we needed to develop a better relationship. The kind of experience I had with Kelly, we needed to kind of duplicate that or replicate that with other officers, with other clinicians like Megan, and just kind of spread the love. Kind of, it was kind of like, okay, I believe in this thing that happened, and I think it could grow.
Well, I just want to kind of add in here that I know Ross had a lot of hurdles in his department to come over with. I had decades of hurdles to come over with because I was dealing with an administration at that time that had been in law enforcement since the 70s and 80s. And by golly, this is the way it's always been, and we're not going to go this route. And it took a lot of convincing on my part and other deputies who started, once we get a little bit further on into the program, that they go out, that they start spreading the word about, hey, this stuff works. And this is a good tool in our bat belt to be able to rely on these folks from mental health. And that took a long time. And honestly, to this day, with the way things have evolved, it's night and day from what it was in 2014 when we started.
How did you address those barriers, both of you, in your agencies around, hey, this really works? How did you help convince people to give it a shot?
On our part, law enforcement, it really took seeing the results work. And by having us actually have, oh, here's a problem case that we have a guy who's calling in at 3 a.m. every morning about his neighbors and this, and we would work on that case. And once we saw a positive resolution of that, we'd take it back to our administration and say, look, this worked. We'd sit around the briefing room and we'd be talking, and I'd be saying, hey, this worked, and explain, you need to get a hold of these guys. This is how we do it. You get dispatchers involved, and they are the ones that are actually calling people out, because when a deputy's on the road, their lifeline is the dispatch center with their radio. So they're calling dispatch. So dispatch needs to be in on how this all works. And so it really took word of mouth, and to be able to see the progress we made for it to even start chinking away that armor. And it took a lot of it to chink away. It took years.
Yeah, it did. And, like on our side of things, it was difficult or in the early beginning, trying to convince our leadership that it was worthwhile. And really, out of their defense, and I say this really honestly, that I think the concern was for us too. We're working hard, we're burned out. The leaders at the time of mental health knew that this was going to be another project, another thing to add on to our load. And it's like, is this something really that you need to take on? Maybe somebody else should take it on. Some of that was out of concern for us. Looking back now, I have a different perspective than I did then, because Megan knows this: when I become really passionate about something, it's hard for me to stop. I really believed in this, and I really believed, especially after getting to know Kelly, because we were always looking for that early adopter, that champion. I really felt like I found that champion in Kelly Andrews in terms of like the link to law enforcement. But like Kelly was saying, it took a lot of time. Megan and we would look for opportunities. This is all pre CIT. And we would bring it up from time to time with leaders, our end, and they were just like, I don't know. And actually, it was the center that we reached out to that helped get us started. We're clinicians, we're doing our thing, we're seeing people. And then this is kind of hovering in the background CIT. We know it needs to be done. We needed some help, kind of a push. And that really changed things after that. That was kind of the help that we needed to really get the ball rolling.
So, for our listeners, the center partners with DPSST as a part of CITCO, so Crisis Intervention Team Center of Excellence. And through that partnership, we help jurisdictions either start CIT or help support CIT. And then we also support training for advanced CIT, corrections CIT, and CIT for dispatch now. So we actually now have specialized CIT, which is really cool. So Kelly, when you're talking about with 911, we are finally moving forward in Oregon with dispatch CIT. We've had a couple of those and they've worked great. So we're continuing to move forward, just like Coos County. You've had this taste of success and you just continue to have continuous improvement. So that's one of the things that we did back then, or the center did back then. I wasn't there yet. And we continue to do today is help people set up CIT. So you don't have to just figure it out by yourself, that you have folks that have been doing this for a while, have helped other jurisdictions, and then can help you along the way. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like, having that help setting up a CIT?
Yeah, of course, Megan was right there helping, and because I couldn't do it by myself. Kelly was there, but then I needed the material, the instructional material. Back then, it wasn't really kind of figured out best practices of 101. There was kind of a general, actually, the manual I got was in draft form, if I remember correctly. It wasn't even the finalized version, but it was enough to get us started. It was pretty crazy. And I think about the stress that it put us under and then doing our regular jobs. And that's what the people that are doing this work are, the people that are the practitioners, all of us that are on this call. It's an additional burden and a pretty significant one, especially when you're talking about the cultural differences. That's what really wore me out. And looking back, I would have done things a lot differently, but I can kind of be a troublemaker. I get kind of irritated that people aren't moving forward, and I want to push and I want to change, and I won't stop. It's not necessarily a good approach all the time either, because things have been this way for so long. And then who's this guy trying to mix it all up? So honestly, like for me, that was kind of where the drain was when we went through that first CIT. It was a good class. That first class that came, they wanted to be there. They were curious. They had heard, maybe they had talked to Kelly. I don't know exactly what the motivation was for all those, that first class, but a lot of them were, I think, the early adopters that went. I don't know what you think about that, Megan.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just something about that first class that really made it work. And I think you hit the nail on the head. They wanted to be there. That was the big difference. And something that we've seen, after doing CIT after that, being voluntold, if you will, right, versus wanting to be there. And I think some of those individuals that were in that first CIT class are now in leadership roles. And as Ross was talking about for the mental health part of it, we had some leadership changes too, I think, that allowed us to move forward with CIT and get a little extra support One of those being Ross moving into a management position, and then myself taking over the crisis team in a management position, because that hadn't happened yet when they initially started talking. And I think some of those types of moves allowed us to kind of push forward a little bit. And really Ross's just motivation to kind of keep going, because he knew that was what we needed. And being able to get behind him, I think, was what really propelled CIT for us.
Megan, were you doing the mobile crisis and crisis services at the same time when you were looking at CIT for Coos County? So it was kind of a parallel process?
Interesting you asked that. No. I had the crisis services, and we still were kind of not always going out and having this mobile crisis piece that we now have that's been up and going for the last 2 years. I distinctly remember, though, when it was kind of identified that mobile crisis was needed, sitting down with Kelly Ross and then one of the sergeants from Oregon State Police, and them saying, Megan, you need to create this team so that they can go out and help us. And I'm like, yeah, okay. You never call. So why am I going to send people out with you? Like, I'll believe it when you see it, kind of a thing. And then it slowly started happening. So when I took over that position, I started kind of identifying people that were willing to go out. And I said, okay, we're not going to say no anymore. If they call and say, hey, can you do this? Because after that initial contact and bridge that Ross and Kelly had, that kind of started this opening of floodgates in some ways, not like in a massive sense, but slowly we would get calls like, hey, can someone come out? Yes, we can. Yes, we'd love to come out. And so we started that process. And then it really became this thing, and that we saw we needed it. As Kelly spoke to, there's just a significant amount of mental health out in the community that wasn't being served. They're not going to come into the clinic. We need to reach them some other way. The push for mobile crisis through OHA in the state and the DOJ happened, and that was awesome for us because it gave us funding to build a full mobile crisis team. So we were running at just kind of this half capacity, and I literally had two ladies that would help kind of go out on calls, and they were really into it, and then they would cover call like in the evenings and also then on the weekends. And it wasn't until we had that push come out, a couple of years ago, that we really were able to staff the team. And so now we have a full 24/7, 365-day a year mobile crisis team that is up and running and has great relationships with our local law enforcement. It has been just amazing to see the transformation. Those ladies were, I have an all-female team. Oh, I have a male now. That this is new, but we had an all-female team for like over a year. And so those ladies were like hopping in the cars with the officers and meeting them, talking to them, going out on weird calls. It's been good. And they've been utilized and been in some tough situations. So it's been really good for us to kind of understand the other culture too, in that piece of it, and being immersed in that. I have some ladies too that are now part of the peer support team through Coos County, which is for first responders, and they're part of that team also. And so just the being immersed and coming together has been pretty awesome to see. And we've seen some great results, if I do say so myself.
What I'd really like to highlight is that Coos County was on this journey before it came out with the money through OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, for the DOJ agreement around mobile crisis, fitness, and all the other jail diversion, all that different money. So you all were already on that journey. And I think sometimes that gets lost in your story, that you were already moving in that direction, making it work how you could. And then with the funds, you were able to go eventually to this 24/7 program. And it made a huge amount of difference to you to be able to really get to the program where you wanted it to be with that money from the state.
Yes, absolutely.
So, how has your CIT or your mobile crisis, because I feel like they kind of go hand in hand, particularly in Coos County. So, how have your crisis intervention teams and mobile crisis programs changed over the years? It sounds like now that they're pretty woven together at this point. Did that start that way from the beginning, or did you come together eventually as you started to learn more about both processes and figured out what worked in Coos County?
In terms of CIT, like we said, the first class was good. There were a lot of people who wanted to be there. So we were really hopeful and like, oh, we're excited and jazzed about the second class, and things were getting better. With law enforcement, we're starting to have some new interesting conversations that we weren't privy to before, like individual officers coming to me or coming to Megan or maybe even other staff saying, I could never publicly talk about this, but I struggle with depression or I struggle with anxiety, fill in the blank. Those kinds of things were happening pretty early on, even surprisingly. So even after like the first CIT. So when we got the second CIT class, it was a rough crowd, and it was not like the first class. And a lot of them were voluntold to be there. It's understandable. The law enforcement was trying to be supportive. They knew that they needed to continue with the collaboration. We honestly didn't know what it was going to look like. After in the second class, there were some people there that were very skeptical of the CIT. Not only was it a training, but really for me, it was more of a networking event because I didn't want just, we're going to tell you how we do things, you're going to tell us how you do things, and then we're good. It doesn't really work. Like, we needed local people. I needed to see more exchange. I needed to see people really trying to get to know each other and work together. That's really what it's about. In that second class, I remember we had some people that really kind of, I don't know, they kind of questioned why we were doing this. And I think they kind of tested us a little bit. And I distinctly remember the second day of the second class and getting into, well, it was really almost a confrontation. And it was kind of about values and how we handle things. And I think everyone, for the most part, handled it pretty professionally. And I really liked how law enforcement leadership stood up and supported us. That was unexpected. We didn't know back then, but I think probably through Kelly's efforts and maybe some other people that Kelly knew, we got the support that we needed to kind of push through that resistance. That was key. Having those police leaders come in and say, no, we see something here. We're going to make sure it keeps going. So that's what happened in the second class. I don't know, Kelly, if you want to have anything more you want to say about that, but I remember that. I remember how Coos Bay came over next day and he's like, it won't happen anymore.
Right. I think that part of it was the overcoming of the culture in law enforcement, because when you have a CIT course, just to go back to the first one, I cherry picked personally 8 people from the sheriff's office to go. And I went around and I said, I want 2 from corrections, I want 2 from patrol, and I want 2 from dispatch, and then I want just 2 more other people. And I said, 2 from our contract positions. And I said, I voluntold them. I said, you're going to go, but I cherry picked them because I knew them. And I wanted them to be our disciples that went out there and spread the word. And they did afterwards. When we got to the second one, word still hadn't filtered out to the rank and file, to a lot of people. The person in charge from the sheriff's office, he cherry picked a few people to go, but really it was starting to be, okay, who wants to go to this? But I'll be quite honest. In law enforcement, a lot of times when you see a class like CIT come up, you send your troublemakers. You send them because you think it's going to fix them. Not that they're going to go there, learn something, go help other ways. I'm sending this guy because he needs fixing, because he's causing us problems. And I think that's what happened in that second CIT. And I really remember, I think I was 18. Was that 18? 18 or 19? 18. So I had been promoted to captain at that point. I remember Ross calling me, and he was in the dither. And it was a true Texan dither. I remember having a long conversation with him, and then I reached out to some other folks who had already been brought into the fold, because at this point, we're doing monthly meetings between mental health, parole and probation, law enforcement, all the partners. We had started getting to know each other a lot better. And I was able to reach out to a captain from another department and was able to get, I think it was their chief, to go and actually put his foot down and say, knock the shenanigans off. Because it was some stuff that when Ross was telling me, I was like, this is just totally inappropriate and this needs to be stomped on. And now how do we do it? Because we're talking about multiple different agencies there. And I know law enforcement was involved. I don't know if, I don't remember if there was any other agencies involved, any other partners, but I think it was just law enforcement folks. And I think it was part of that was, we'll send them so they can get fixed. There was just no fixing them.
I think too, like what's important that Kelly brought up that we haven't really talked about is this monthly meeting where we had already started these relationships. So when one of us were like, what is this? We were able to reach out to those community partners and people that we had relationships with and go like, what is going on? We need your help here. We need some support. And I think that was really something that was key also that brought CIT together, mobile crisis together, but then also the work that we've continued to do. I mean, we still have those monthly meetings.
Yeah, it's a very good point. The monthly meeting has been, I think, like I was alluding to earlier in the podcast, is that was one of the many great and wonderful positive side effects from the CIT relationship. So it just kind of like happened naturally and concurrently. And we were able to develop, like Megan said, better relationships. And then that in turn reinforced the other work we were doing in CIT. It all helped. That second CIT class, it ended well. We were able to kind of get through the bumps, and interestingly enough, without naming names or anything, but some of the people from that class are still around, and it's a lot better now. It really is.
So when you say that the class ended up ending well, what did that look like as opposed to how it started?
I think what really helped was having peers come and talk. Megan runs CIT now, so it'll be up to her how she wants to do things. But for me, it was really important to have the peers there, really just to help with encouraging empathy. That was really the underlying goal for me. Was they needed to kind of see and hear from those who struggle with mental illness, who have lived experience. This is a term that we all use now. It's an accepted term, by the way, that really wasn't accepted back in the day when Megan and I first started. And so we do talk about it. And I think for some of those officers, hearing directly from the peers really was impactful, because that's on a Wednesday. Was the Tuesday was the bad day. We got through it. They came back. Wednesday afternoon was the peers. Boy, it really kind of hammered it home at that point. And I think it changed the minds a little bit, which is really what I was looking for. I really was looking to change people's minds, even if it was just a little bit, a little twist. And I think it happened. I think just deciding, you know what, we're going to figure it out. I was so mad on Tuesday. I wanted to kick someone out of class, but I didn't do it. I called Kelly. I called Chappie at Coos Bay. I kind of worked through it. And I'm like, you know what, we're going to get through this. And I think people remember that. So I think that's probably why it ended well. And I think some of the officers who even been around for a really long time, some of the ones that Kelly was talking about, they even had some really positive things to say on Friday. I remember that. So that made me hopeful.
Yeah, I would almost reiterate that, is that in law enforcement, we spend a lot of time reading people, and it's our initial impressions and reading the situation, because we're doing it for safety. We're doing it for resolution of the situation. And honestly, with folks with mental illness, a lot of cops, I think, just look at them and go, I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know what's going on in there. And they don't have the training at that point to really think about it. So when you bring the peers in and you hear from them what's going on in their brain, I think that really had a profound effect on the officers that were in there, because we didn't do that the first year. I don't remember us doing that, did we, the first year? Or was it we brought in one or two like on Friday or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, we did. We had peers the first year. I think it grew the second year, like everything from our end. The training end was improving, and more people knew about it. And so we had more peers come, and more people told their story, and it was really moving. And even the officers were moved. You can see how you couldn't be. But
When I hear you talk about how you put together CIT and mobile crisis in Coos County, it highlights for me the very important thing that we see about crisis intervention team training is it's not just about the training, right? It's not just about that one training, but Coos County really seems to live, breathe CIT throughout the meetings, how you work together, the networking. Like it really seems like you all inherently got that it was more than just having people in a training room, but it was about the relationship and how you continue to integrate and work with each other going forward, not just what we do for this 1 week.
Yes, and that was evident clearly in the third class. The third class to me was the best class. They came in ready to go. Word was out that it works. The collaborations in the field were working. I can't remember exactly, Megan, where you were with your crisis team at that point. I think we got over that fulcrum point. It was teetering the other way, and we were moving into a new place. And I remember that third class very well. Everyone wanted to be there. They were very interested. They were curious. They wanted to get involved. Several of the officers there were even talking about working as a mental health officer. That was that was a new conversation I hadn't heard before. And some of the officers were newer and they were getting more, I think, training at this point at the academy. It was like a compounding effect. It was working better in the field. Megan's was having success. CIT was known at this point. We had convinced the leaders. This was also happening statewide. So there was a much more of this kind of like shared knowledge amongst everyone that this does work. And I'll also say Friday afternoon was a big success for me and Megan. We were doing these role plays. In the first year we had at the local casino, and the second year, was it the second year we moved to the church?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Megan was running that. It made sense naturally for Megan to be doing it because this was again crisis response, crisis team. This was with her thing. And it was like live role plays. They were getting to practice their skills, which is what they wanted to do. I was learning they wanted less class time. They wanted more hands-on. That was happening on Friday. We were getting better. The second class was better. The third class was even better after that. Everyone knew what they were doing. It was fun. And it was kind of like playing the third time, like we were kind of over each other and we were just, okay, let's get in here, let's get it done. I think at that point, like I felt really good. Whatever happens, I think at this point, it's going to carry on. But of course, you got to have people to do it. I was able to find a new opportunity at Advanced Health and I was really worried, but I knew Megan was the person to do it. So she's it's like pass the torch to Megan. And I was really worried about Kelly retiring, and it's like, what is it going to look like after Kelly's gone, because Kelly was our champion on the law enforcement side. But I think that's all kind of what's carried on within law enforcement. And Megan has her contacts, I have mine. It's a lot of the same people. This other person that Megan was talking about earlier from OSP sounds like maybe involved again next year with CIT. I'm hopeful. I think it's going to go great that Megan's running it and that there's a known curriculum. At this point, it's just how Megan wants to see things through her lens.
No pressure at all, right? I mean,
No. Megan, so you were running Mobile Crisis the entire time. Through the iterations of the class 1 through 3, I'm curious what that looked like operationalized for Mobile Crisis for you. Was it changing what it looked like when you were doing Mobile Crisis response?
kind of interesting. So Mobile Crisis was actually kind of evolving as CIT was evolving. And part of that was because we had a better idea, I think, with the monthly meetings we were having, but also CIT, what was needed and what kind of capacity did we really need to be utilized and how could we help? Because that, I think, initially wasn't totally understood. Okay, we're going to go out with you, but like, what are we going to do and what are you going to do and what is our roles together? By having CIT and having that continue to grow, that became more clear to us what our roles were, how do we work together, and then how do we get the individual to where they need to go. By the third class, I'm thinking Mobile Crisis was full capacity, if I recall. And so we had a full Mobile Crisis team running. Those relationships and things have been built. So it really was this evolution with CIT in many ways that Mobile Crisis came to be. And it was with the help of CIT and with the work we were all doing together that really brought Mobile Crisis to where it is today.
How about for you, Kelly? What did it look like from class 1 to class 3?
From class 1, we were still in the process of teaching our folks that this was a good thing. And it really, from class 1, we were still at space 1, basically, with the whole process. By the end of class 3, I'm already retired, but I'm hearing a lot of feedback from our guys thanking us for getting this going and or starting it. After class 2, I'm in a captain position, and I'm not as much in tune with the guys at that point. But when I would walk through there, they would have discussions with me about it, and they were like, "Hey, we went out," or I'd look at the logbook and see that mobile response had been out on a call with them and stuff. So it made my heart sing to see that whole process gaining traction and just building on itself. And it is my entire hope that it continues to build, and I know it will.
I know that continuous improvement is what Coos County does. I mean, before you retired, I'm at the center 3 years. We did a sequential intercept mapping, and I remember distinctly Kelly and Ross at that mapping and the relationship that you had. For our listeners, sequential intercept mapping is looking at all the intercepts within the criminal justice system and looking at where we can intercede on someone who is justice involved, who also has behavioral health conditions, whether that be psychiatric, neurocognitive, or intellectual developmental disabilities, and where we can intercede, where we can hold that person accountable, but also get them into the treatment that they need to. And whether that's early diversion early on or supporting them through treatment as they move through the criminal justice system, if that needs to happen. I remember you guys. And so and how much fun you had together and how much you give each other a hard time, which was always kind of a delightful in a sequential intercept mapping meeting. But you have always continued to improve and go forward and say, what's next? And I don't think anybody's really sung your praises around that, because that's something I'm always hearing is, well, what's next? What are we going to do now? How are we going forward? So now you have CIT as a thing. It's unquestioned. It is going forward in Coos County. Mobile crisis is going great. You've done sequential intercept mapping. What's on the horizon for Coos County?
This is my favorite part. I like thinking about what's next. I like thinking about what's possible. Yes, I'm an idealist. It's part of what drives me. It's part of what I've accepted about myself. And I will say that I think when we did that mapping, I remember very well when we all came together and decided these are our priorities, continue CIT, grow mobile response. Those two things have happened. The monthly meeting that's continued. Number one was a sobering center. I remember that, and I have that document still, and I refer to it sometimes, and life goes on. We're busy. We're doing our thing. I'm in a new position at the CCO. So even though I'm having to build a new department at CCO, which I've been doing for the last year, that's taken up most of my time. It's always been in the back of my mind. And we did have a meeting earlier in the year, pre-COVID. It's hard to think how different it was back, how things have changed since then. Because we weren't wearing masks. We met out at treatment center, actually. We had a bunch of people. People don't realize like that meeting wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. People were comfortable. Everyone was on board. We were there to talk about the sobering center. I'm talking about the hospital, law enforcement, like everybody was there. And I thought that we were going to have to collect all this data and prove justify building one. But people were like, we need a sobering center. Everyone agrees. But that hadn't seemed like a long time ago now. Someone has to kind of push it. I've been doing that when I can. And now it's just finding the money, finding who's going to do it and where it's going to go. Luckily, found the subject matter expert and found the best practices. So it's promising. Again, it kind of feels like pre-CIT sometimes.
I think a lot of it is, so you really have to think about the funding. And that's one thing I had to learn as I went into administration. And so I think finding the funding to get it going. Everybody wants it, but finding the funding to get to it, and then finding the people to staff it, and how's it going to work. Everybody's busy, and it's just going to take staying on top of it with the crew. You have to find people within the organizations to keep that battle moving forward. And that's going to be the big thing, and funding. I think once we do that, it'll be a done deal. It's just everything just has to fall into place. And we were very fortunate here that when we went through this process, things fell into place. And it fell into place because of hard work on everybody's part. And one of the things I'd like to kind of go back to is not only were Ross and Megan and I, fighting the battles within our own organizations, we had to drag our partners in through this too, because we had to rally. You had the local hospital, you had local organizations attached to different things, and I mean, it's like pulling a sled through the deep snow, and we were constantly just pulling them forward, and finally got everybody up to where we were all on the same page. In the monthly meetings, there was some interesting discussions in those early meetings about disappointments, about expectations. And I think everybody kind of came to an area where we had respect for each side and we were able to move forward from there. And so with the Sobering Center, I'm long since retired, so I haven't been part of it. But as that line keeps going forward in the sand, it'll get done. It's just getting those cogs to fall into place.
I think that both Kelly and Ross have said it well. We really started with coming kind of from nothing with no relationships and really building these and coming to the table without our defenses up all the time. And that took a while. And so now to move towards a sobering center, which is what's next, we have all the players, they're ready to do it. And Ross has really worked his tail off to kind of get us there in terms of what do we do next. It's just getting there and taking the time to do that and finding the key players, which has been extra hard to, I think, do stuff because of COVID. I mean, that really has brought so many things to a halt for all of us and our efforts moving forward.
I couldn't help but notice that piece around COVID. So, you had the meeting and everyone said yes, and then COVID hit. And that has been a game changer for all of us, operation wise, funding wise, going forward. If you're looking at what that's going to look like with general fund dollars in the next couple sessions. So I could see where that would definitely impact and be very frustrating around the Sobering Center, the COVID piece of it. We're getting to the end of our time. I'm wondering what thoughts you want to leave our listeners with. Any words of advice or just thoughts?
Of course, I'll say something. It's just about the relationships. You just have to keep them going. That monthly meeting is so important. People don't realize how important that monthly meeting is. For me, it's trying to help Megan make it better, make it more complete, make it more whole, having the right people at the table. It's just us. We just have to figure it out amongst ourselves. It's no secret. There's no one that's going to come and save the day. It's just us trying to figure out how to best manage the situations. And sometimes that's just how it is. And there's no answer. And we just need to stop blaming each other. Really, it's just not helpful. That's for me. I mean, that's what it always for me is trying to find ways to repair, build new relationships, and maintain the ones that we have. So.
And I'll echo upon that. As first responders out there, if we show up on a scene and we don't have a plan, we're just in crisis ourselves trying to deal with their crisis. The last few years with all of us setting it up and CIT coming along and everything, we've been making that plan. And so now folks have in their toolbox on their back belt, like I've said before, they have a tool they can use. They can use mobile response. They can use these relationships that have been formed and use that to help them help somebody else. And that way they show up with a plan. They're not scrambling themselves trying to figure out, what do I do here? Like we talked about, I think it was I guess it was the third CIT. This is like a marriage. It really is. And I really told the guys, I said, don't get a divorce because it's really bad.
I guess I will additionally echo both Ross and Kelly and won't get a divorce anytime soon. It is about the relationships. And I think the other thing that I know I found in stuff, something I think Ross and I have talked about and Kelly and I have talked about is you're going to get 2 steps forward and then you're going to go 3 steps backwards. And that is the process. And to not get defeated along the way, because there's a lot of that and there's a lot of kind of uphill battle. But when you get to the top and you have these relationships built, it is pretty incredible. The work that can be done and the things and mountains you can move just because you have that relationship. Yes, it's been pretty incredible just to see that and to see how everybody works together now. The monthly meeting that we have, like I mentioned earlier, in the beginning, man, we would come ready defensive, like, okay, what are you going to blame me for now? Whose fault is it this time, and pointing fingers? And it's not like that as much anymore. Every once in a while we have a new person come in. For the most part, we know we're all there to solve problems and to help each other out, and we have each other's backs. And I think that is the biggest takeaway from all of this, that you can get there. It's going to take time, but you'll get there. Just be persistent and persevere, because that's what it takes.
Here, here.
The communication piece of partners rowing together against the current versus picking in on each other, blaming each other for the current is such a huge difference in being able to move forward. I hear that over and over again in communities when folks are able to work together to solve the problem instead of blaming one another for the problem. Makes a huge amount of difference. And then the sage advice to like hang in there. It can be a difficult relationship from time to time as you're trying to figure it out, and it isn't always smooth. And sometimes there are moments where it looks like you're not going anywhere and that you're taking steps back, but that you will continue to go forward as long as you continue to communicate and persevere and be patient, which is for some of us, myself included, sometimes not my best character trait. Ross is laughing and smiling and nodding because he knows me well. And also, as I say that, and I joke around with Ross with that, also having your champions. Coos County is really lucky that they had all three of you as champions, and they continue to have Megan and Ross as champions. Kelly, I say that because you're retired, and I hope that you're doing fun things as well. that they continue to have those champions, and then finding new champions as folks retire and start doing fun things instead of being day in, day out in these situations. Is there anything else that you want to share before we're done?
I think also you need to look into partnerships. You need to look for people who, even when presented with adversity, find a workaround. Because I can tell you in my career, I've always seen those folks, those law enforcement officers who a new law will come down or there'll be a new ruling from the court. And the first thing you say, oh, they're just handicapping me again. I can't do this. I can't do that. Well, what can you do? And one of the things that the three of us really figured out was, look, as a cop, I can't do that. But Ross and Megan go, but we can do this. And then I'm like, wow, if you can do this, then I can facilitate this and we can get a resolution to this. So you need to look for those people who don't get stymied by adversity, because they're just going to be the quitters. And you need to have those folks that are going to look at it, think about it for a second and go, yeah, that way's blocked, but here's a way I can get around. I may have to lock it into 4 low, but I can get there.
Well, I've been really excited to watch your guys' journey in Coos over the years. I've had the opportunity, really not to work with you, Megan or Kelly, with you two very much, but I've had the opportunity to work with Ross in the different positions I've had. And I'm always really impressed with how you continue to move forward, even when it's hard. Like you were talking about, Kelly, just finding a different way through. Y'all always find a different way through, even when it looks pretty unpassable.
You have to look outside the box. I remember one guy we had who I think we found out later that besides his mental health issues, he was on methamphetamine and stuff, but he was firing shotguns off towards his relatives' houses and everything like that. We went out there several times, not us, but deputies would go out there, and not much they could do. And this was early on in the whole process. And finally, I get a call out there, and the guy's niece had taken away the shotgun and pulled 16 shotgun shells off of him. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to take him to the hospital on a police officer's mental hold. Of course, it's nothing until you get there, and it's a 2-position hold. But it's all in how they write their statement once they get to the hospital. Because a lot of cops get there and go, yeah, the guy's crazy. Let's just, let him go in there. And you really have to lay out, what are the steps? What did you see? And it took me telling the doctor that, yeah, I pulled 16 shotgun shells off of him when the niece had done that. And he just kind of was like, oh, so he kind of meant business. Well, the guy goes through, I can't remember how long he was in the hospital, but he gets released. Well, I kept his shotgun, and he kept calling me and saying, I want my shotgun back. And I'm like, I don't want to give this back because he's not ready to have it back yet. How am I going to get this? And so I ended up, not that there was anything behind it, but I said, look, you get a letter from Ross Acker who says, you can have the shotgun and I'll give it back. Well, Ross took that and he helped him through a lot of stuff. And after about a year, Ross calls me and says he can have a shotgun back. And I don't think till the end of my career, we've never had another problem with him. I don't know what's happened since then, but I think that he really got some help. And Ross was a big part of that. And so we helped protect his family and anybody else.
That's quite the success story. What other cool success stories do you all have? Situations you thought, oh man, and then it came out golden at the end, or as golden as it was going to get?
I had one where actually mobile response came out, and the guy actually, I'm meeting with the two mobile response folks. I mean, we're standing in the road getting our game plan together, and the guy comes marching down the road with a rifle and a sword in his hand. And we were able to get it. Luckily, the rifle was a BB gun, but I didn't know that at the time. We were able to take the sword and the rifle away from him, and then they went to work and actually, I mean, it was a quick resolution. It was like, okay, yep, let's get him to the hospital. We can do this, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, that was perfect. And that we were there at the right time. We just hadn't had a plan yet, but we had a sort of a plan.
Do you think that your training around behavioral health helped in that circumstance to get the sword and the gun away from the guy? Because that could have gone really, really different. Do you think that helped at all?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was much more comfortable at that point in that situation than I was when Ross and I first went out, because we didn't know each other then. By this point, we developed this relationship between mental health and at least myself, and we're spreading the word and everything, that yeah, I felt totally comfortable with it because they engaged him in conversation, and I was able to just, hey, let me hold those for you. And I was able to take those away from him, and they were within a certain area. I put them in my vehicle where they were secure, but he knew right where they were, and they were able to engage him. Yeah, if it hadn't been for our relationships, that could have ended so poorly.
Megan, Ross, do you have any stories of success you want to add?
I think one that will forever stick out in my mind, and it was a success in a couple ways. One, with how mental health and law enforcement worked together to get this individual to where he needed to go, but then the outcome after we did that. And it was an individual that we had been in and out of the hospital here multiple times due to danger to self and others. And he just continued to amp up and was super dangerous. He was at the point where he had gone into local business and was threatening people and had actually chased someone on the boardwalk with a tire iron. He was so dangerous that the hospital didn't want to keep him, and we were kind of stuck. What do we do? This guy is a danger to self or others. He definitely can't be in the community. And it really took Ross and myself making calls to our law enforcement leadership we knew, and them working their magic to get him somewhere safe, which unfortunately ended up being the jail, but it worked out because we were able to do that commitment process, and he got help. And he is the most neat person and successful person now. He was on the ACT team, I believe, for a while, and he's doing really well. And that, I think, will forever stick out in my mind because of just how it's this crazy intense situation, and we were able to really just pull it together. And okay, guys, this is it. I'm calling in my favor. Let's get this done because this needs to happen, or we're going to have a homicide on our hand. That was kind of, I think, the point. Well, I know that I was like, oh my gosh, he's just up in the ante every time here. So that was a pretty incredible kind of success story, I think, in terms of our relationship and working together. But then also that individual really, he got better.
I love the ending to that with that, it was able to be successful and he got better. So not only did you prevent it from going horribly wrong, but you made such a difference in his life going forward. Ross, do you have any stories?
One I was thinking of was, an individual that we were dealing with the community for quite some time. He was homeless. He was really struggling with a thought disorder, and it took us a lot of interactions with him to kind of move him to a place where he wasn't in that space anymore. And it was a lot of collaborations between us and law enforcement, and I even a stand-in at the bank, having an officer there and me going there. And the understanding was at that point, because of all that we've talked about before, that we can work together and this will work. And this individual has gotten so well that he's now a peer support specialist. He's in recovery, has been for years. He's employed. He has a place to live. He's doing great. So those are the kinds of stories that Meg and I really hold on to being clinicians. We need to see that from time to time. It kind of helped propels us forward. This individual is still around, he's doing great, he's working, and he's a contributing member of the agency.
To be able to teach folks who are not functioning in society very well to be able to function has got to be the ultimate goal, because incarceration is not the answer. It just is not the answer. There are folks with mental illnesses, there are some that in certain circumstances, they need to be incarcerated. And, Ross and I have had that conversation too. And I think we're both in agreement that in specific circumstances, that may be the answer, but it's not the whole answer for everybody. It's not the blanket one. That really is out of our relationships that we've developed. I think that's the one thing that we've really gotten across, is that incarceration just is not the answer.
I love these stories. I love the human face that it puts on this conversation, because so often we talk about statistics and we talk about it in theory, but we really don't get to talk about how law enforcement and behavioral health working together, we change lives, because that's why we do this work.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I thank you, Kelly, Megan, and Ross, for your time today and coming and talking about the CIT program and the mobile crisis program in Coos County, and your new exciting adventure trying to get a sobering center going in Coos County as well. I really thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing with our listeners your journey in Coos County and how you stuck it through, even when you had setbacks, to work together and continue to move forward in Coos. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
For having us.
The Center Collaborative is a production of the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, a specialized division of Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Incorporated. It is produced by me, Chris Thomas, with production assistance from Patrick Kennedy. Music by Patrick Mulvihill and Patrick Kennedy. Subscribe to the Center Perspective using your favorite app. To learn more about criminal justice and behavioral health in Oregon, visit the Center's website at ocbhji.org. You can also find us on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. Join us next time as we chat with the experts about programs and partnerships at work within this complex and yet compelling field. I am Chris Thomas from the Center. Thank you for joining our conversation.